I'll be like crystal clear with you, right? The British government and every other Western government within the next 10 years has only two options. Either develop the institutional capacity to tax extremely rich people or shut down the entirety of the welfare state. Those are the two options. The welfare state is not a God-given right? Most countries in the world do not have one, and the UK and most of Europe in most of its history did not have one. Okay, if you do not protect it, you will lose it. And if you allow, 1% of 1% of the people to own everything, and you have no institutional capacity to access the resources that they own, you will have nothing.
Hello, welcome to Barry's Economics. This is the second of 3 videos where I talk to Gary Stevenson, who has made an excellent documentary called How to Get Filthy Rich.
My proposal is a 2% tax on wealth of above £10 million.
Absolute populist claptrap.
People are having to make a decision on whether they eat or whether they stay warm.
Why is it only rich people who are supposed to not look out for their own interests? Is everyone else looking out for them?
How to Get Filthy Rich with Gary Stevenson on Channel 4.
You really do have to see it. And if you like the message, share it with everyone you know. So in the first part of this interview with Gary Stevenson, we looked at Gary's background as a city trader and in particular what made him leave that world and how a work culture can essentially roboticize you and insulate you from the consequences of your actions and the world that you live in. I
said to him do you think we should do something? And this guy knows that I'm making money and he started to make money too, betting on collapse. And he's like, what do you mean? We should do something. And I'm like, about collapsing living standards. And he's like, well, we already put the trade on. You see, you laugh, but he has not said that in any way ironically. He's like, we've already put the trade on, so what do you mean? And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm not talking about the trade. Do you think we should do something? And then he is like, are you saying you think we should put more of the trade on? That's what he thinks. And I'm like, no, it's not about the trade. I'm not talking about the trade. It's should we do something about it? And he's like, I don't understand. We've done it. Are you saying we should take it off? He's so trained. And this is, I think this is I think what we train a lot of young people to be. It's you take there's no space to step back and look at, is this right? Is this a thing? And I think people have been so trained to be so individualized and individualistic that they just think these things can't be fixed, things can't be solved.
In this part of the interview, we look at how difficult it is to change things, the structures around us that seem entrenched, the habits and practices that keep people resistant to change, and crucially, what we can do about it. I hope you enjoyed this second episode of my interview with Gary Stevenson.
I see a correlation between what you're saying about traders being inside trading, right? You ask a question, it's almost, that's the only language they hear. It's like, oh, well, how does that impact the trade? Oh, we've got to do something about the trade. But I see a correlation with people that are inside politics.
Yeah.
Is that they don't necessarily come out to look at almost like the inequality. It's more of a theoretical thing where they're talking about the politics. We've got to do something about this. Oh yeah, how are we going to get these people out? Or it's less about the actual mechanism of fighting for the people. And it's more about the kind of theoretical thing about, are you left wing or are you right wing? Are you with us or you're against us? It's more not tribal because it's a different thing. But do you see that correlation? Because when I hear you talk about both, it's almost like taking a step outside of what is essentially an inside baseball thing that forgets about wider society in a way.
Okay, look, it would be easy for me to be here and politicians are dickheads, politicians are shit. I'd get a lot of points for
but
that.
Even traders aren't dickheads or shit.
But look,
these are real people.
These people, both traders and politicians, people, top level media, top level economists, academics, these are very stressful, very competitive, high pressure jobs. And they're under a lot of pressure, they're under a lot of scrutiny, they're under a lot of focus. And I think when you're in that situation, you get into this kind of permanent vigilance state, and you're like next problem, and it's very, very difficult to zoom out. And I remember having a few meetings maybe last year, and I was going around the left-wing think tanks, and I've been quite frustrated at the left-wing think tanks lack of support for my campaign, if I'm totally honest. And by last year, my campaign, if I could say it myself, it's fucking massive. I went and I tried to work for these think tanks for free, right? And I didn't think they were doing anything. I shouldn't say that. I didn't think they were going to really win on the big key issue of inequality. They weren't doing anything on inequality.
They
to be
weren't
honest.
talking to the people that were suffering from
Yeah, and I went and I would have worked for them for free if I thought that they were going to win, but I didn't think they were going to win. So I left. Okay, I start the YouTube channel. I worked my tits off, if I'm honest, for 5 years. And then, well, longer than that really. And then I go back to them and I'm like, okay, right, well, I've built the thing now. I tried to back you on your thing, but your thing wasn't working. So I've gone and built my thing and I think my thing can win. Are you going to back me? And what I got back from a lot of these think tanks was, well, it would take a long time to like properly plan a wealth tax and the government needs money now. And it was like, well, I fucking told you 10 years ago and I told you 5 years ago, right? And then, now we're here. But obviously you can probably hear the frustration in my voice, but these guys are under their pressures as well. You know what I mean? And everyone, the truth is, like, okay, we're probably going to get a new prime minister coming in the next couple of months. He or she is going to come in and be under a lot of fucking short-term pressure. And the truth is, we're not ready to do wealth taxes now. If you're going to do wealth taxes, because the government has not been listening to me for 5 years, they haven't done the prep work that would be needed to do the wealth tax now. And they're going to need money now. And I think what you have is a bunch of people who are working very hard and are very stressed and have these near-term performance targets that they need to hit. And I think in a sense, we've actually created a society that is to quite a significant degree structurally incapable of seriously considering long-term problems. Like you have the obvious, you have the same thing if you look at the growth of the far right. You have the same thing if you look at climate change, which is really, in the scale of government, it wouldn't cost a lot to develop a wealth tax. To hire 5 economists, pay them for 2-3 years, that's like nothing, absolutely nothing in the context of government. But there's nobody there who's really serious about long-term problems. And not to say I like Dominic Cummings. I thought Dominic Cummings was interesting because at least here you had somebody talking the talk of, let's fix the long-term problems. Yeah. But, if I'm being totally honest, it looks like the Prime Minister is going to change. And people don't know this, I do mention it sometimes, I am lobbying my fucking tits off out there. Yeah, seriously, and I'm not a natural lobbyist, right? And it's not what I like to be doing. But, I don't just, I don't do the YouTube to be famous. I don't do it for the good of my health. I want to change policy. So I've had to become, to some degree, a lobbyist. And that lobbying, if I'm totally honest, for most of the last sort of 2 years when I've been known, has mainly involved banging my fucking head against a brick wall. But now, with the potential of a government change, obviously I can't make any promises. Suddenly, a lot of people who would not have given me the time of day even 6 months ago are asking me to talk. Yeah. So, I'm hoping that we and the fact is, the UK government, like most governments, has been dealing with this problem, with all of its problems, by just borrowing money. Or selling off assets. And that's been the way of Western governments for the last really 20, 30 years. That's how we dealt with COVID. That's how we dealt with 2008. That's how, European governments dealt with 2011, borrow money, borrow money, borrow money. But the truth is, some people will disagree with me on this. There's some people on the internet I'm sure will. What you are seeing now is, at some point you have to deal with the fact that a small group of people are increasingly building a monopoly on all of the resources that you need. Yeah. And, you need to access those. And they're only going to lend you money as long as you have assets against that. And, eventually you hit a point where they don't lend you any more money. And the only way to fix that is taxation. So, I wish it had happened before now, because the truth is, this next Prime Minister, if there is one in the next few months, is going to come into a fucking difficult game. They are going to be playing that game on hard mode.
Like being forced into a situation in a way, to actually make a change, you're forced into it.
Well, they're finally realizing what I've said all the time, which is, if you keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, eventually you can't borrow anymore and you have to sort out your tax. Because the truth is, at the moment, no country in the world really has even tried to build the institutional capacity to be able to tax the very rich, even if they wanted to. So what that means is we can tax high-earning workers, but we cannot tax the very, very rich. But economic power has rapidly shifted away from high-earning workers and towards the very, very rich. And if we can't tax them, we're And I've been screaming about that for fucking years and years and years. But finally, you know, the government is realizing, like, if we don't do this, I'll be like crystal clear with you, right? The British government and every other Western government within the next 10 years has only two options. Either develop the institutional capacity to tax extremely rich people or shut down the entirety of the welfare state. Those are the two options. The welfare state is not a God-given right? Most countries in the world do not have one, and the UK and most of Europe in most of its history did not have one. Okay, if you do not protect it, you will lose it. And if you allow, 1% of 1% of the people to own everything, and you have no institutional capacity to access the resources that they own, you will have nothing. You will have no welfare state. And I wish these politicians had been able to see what I think was obvious 5 years ago.
But they're in a bubble. Yeah. And people with money or lobbyists have access to them, which kind of changes their perspective on things, because they're the people that are being heard from, and there aren't really strong unions anymore, so you don't see the other side. Like one of the things, as you were talking about that, is like we were at the Zuckerman
event this week.
This week. And one of the things
Gabriel Zuckerman, the world's top inequality economist, for those who don't know.
Yeah. One of the things I found really, really kind of like simple.
Yeah.
Like just the chart of how much tax the super rich pay versus how much tax everybody else. Because the correction doesn't have to be like it's not about, when it's on the media or you might be on Piers Morgan or whatever, everyone's, like whoever's set up opposite you is talking about, well, you can't tax the rich, they'll leave. It's like, hang on, we're not taking everything. We just want the same, initially at least, the same tax rate for the super rich as for everyone else.
Yeah.
But the graph really clearly says
that they show much lower rates of tax.
But they actually pay much lower rates of tax than everyone else. And it's so, like, when it's debated in the media, obviously the media is owned by people that are super rich. Yeah. So it's put that way. But when it's debated in the media, it's almost like the conversation is, we want to take everything.
Yeah.
But the actual conversation, no, we just want parity.
Like, we want to breathe. That's it.
But you should get taxed the same amount that everybody gets.
Zuckerman will know, and Zuckerman will say himself, what Gabriel Zuckerman is asking for, and I've been really, really trying to get Gabriel Zuckerman better known in the British public, because I think it's the perfect counter to this. The Rory Stewart, show me the Economist. Well, here's the Economist. Yeah. You know what I mean? I think if the rest of these politics is serious, they will have Zuckerman on, because they have asked to be shown the Economist, and we've shown them the Economist. But he would say himself, even if you tax them at the same rates as you tax the poor, it will not be enough to stop inequality from increasing. Yeah, exactly. And he's aware of that, because of the quite simple fact that for no reason other than compound interest. If I have a wealth of £1 billion, so I am the poorest billionaire in the entire country, and I make 5% a year on that, which is a very conservative rate of return. These guys normally make closer to 10%. Then I will make £1 million a week passive income. That is what I will make, right? So, and that, that passive income comes from you. When you pay your rent, when you go to the supermarket, when you pay your bills, this money is going to the owners of the assets. If I'm making £1 million a week passive income, and you're spending basically all of your discretion, all of your money on my passive income, your rent, your mortgage, your food, your bills, of course I'm going to accumulate more and more assets. Yeah. Obviously I'm going to accumulate more and more assets.
Actually, like the Zuckerman thing for me, was like, man, that is so clear that my parents could understand it. It doesn't have to be combative. It doesn't have to be, we want to take everything off, eat the rich. None of that. It's just like pay the same. But talking in those terms, suddenly if you've got the stats, really simple stats in front of you, it becomes, if you've got economic literacy, when this is the thing that I think you do well, and I'm like, you've mentioned it in this conversation about doing a channel as you, and being non-tribal. You're bringing economic literacy to people across the spectrum. Is the kind of like, what's it called? The vaccination. The vaccination to just things spiraling out. Like if everybody knows that, then suddenly that's in the debate, and then the politicians have to do it because it's the conversation.
Yeah, but the more I do my channel, and so when I first did my channel, it was very focused on, really I was doing the channel as what I was, which was a trader, which is like, here is some analysis of the economy, and here is what is going to happen to the economy. And it was very just like black and white. But then And, you know, the predictions are fantastically good. You know, I've got a very good track record of these things, and I made a lot of money betting on those predictions. But when I made those videos, I had friends come to me and like quite panicked, to be honest, because I predicted a lot of things, including a rise in house prices, which did happen, despite what everybody seems to want to tell you. Since the beginning of COVID, house prices are much, much higher. Lots of people came to me like, oh, well, but I need a house. You know, beginning of COVID, I was in my like early 30s. You know, a lot of my friends at that kind of stage where they're trying to buy a house. And I'm like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And I realized, or I felt that, because the truth is, the actual economic situation is very bad. This is the facts, right? And by just going out and telling people that, I don't think it actually, I mean, it did help us, because the first thing is like, people were being told things will be fine, things will be fine. And that's not true. Things will not be fine in the absence of action. So the first thing is you need people to recognize, unless we do something, things will get worse. But just by delivering it in this cold, hard, facts-based way, I think it moved people into a space of like fear. And I don't think that like we can, not to be like overly like Mahatma Gandhi about it, but like I don't think we can build a better society on the back of everybody being really fucking scared. Like I think we need, and it's a thing that I think about much more, like more recently, is how do we move people into a space where they are thinking like, yeah, things are fucked. And the way that I'm going to respond to that is I'm going to get my fucking head down, like whatever Gary is or Barry is or other people in your community, and I'm going to fucking try and fix that. And I think I'm really interested in this sort of, you know, I talked about this sort of robotization of humans. You just make money. And I just think that is the most beautiful trick the rich can ever play on the poor, is to convince the poor to be selfish. If the rich can convince the poor to be selfish, the poor will always be poor. Because the only way the poor have ever, can ever, will ever protect themselves from the very powerful is strength in numbers. The rich have everything else. They've got the money, they've got the newspapers, you know, they've got the power, you know. But what the poor have is that there's way, way, way more of them. And they only work, they only protect their interests by fighting together. It's like a fucking Bruce Lee movie, right? You know, Bruce Lee walks into a room and the 100 bad guys fighting one at a time, you know. If they all went at the same time, he would have said, well, maybe he's good, I don't know. But, you know, yeah, so the more and more now, more and more I try and think, you know, there's a quote, it's Napoleon quote. I'm getting all my French quotes out today. We'll get Camus in later. It says, a man does not have himself killed for a halfpence a day or a petty distinction. You must speak to the soul in order to electrify him. And I think a problem we have right now is a lot of like leftist political communication and a lot of centrist political communication is like facts, figures. And I get criticised. People criticise me on the internet. Oh, Gary, you're just a fucking populist. You're just a, but you need to be able to inspire people, and you need to, because people need to believe it. They need to believe that when they go out there, listen, it's a lot easier to just not worry about it. You know what I mean? But, you know, people need to believe that when they go out there, when they sacrifice their time, their energy to help you do a thing, you know what I mean? You know, like their grandparents and great-grandparents did, that you're going to be out there on the front lines with them, you know what I mean? And like if I'm totally honest, and I know probably the same for you too, I've been overworking the last couple of years, and I don't think it's healthy really the way I've been overworking. But I feel like I need to do that because I need to show the public, look, because the public know when they see me, here's a rich guy, you know what I mean? But so I need to put a little bit of blood and sweat into it, you know what I mean? And it's this, so to be honest, like when I think a lot of the left and the centre will look at the far right communications and they'll be like, oh, that's, you know, populism, whatever. You need to have emotion, and you need to have stories. And I'm when you look at it, in some ways, I envy the far right because they have somehow managed, in many cases, to get into the hearts and minds of poor people who don't need to be political and get them out there, you know, on the streets, passionate and caring about something. And listen, of course, I am incredibly worried about the rapid growth of the far right. And I come from a very multi-ethnic, I come from a very Muslim area. And, you know, my friends from back home, I know how they feel about it and I understand how they feel about it. But we need to talk to the soul. You know, I was talking to Alistair Campbell and email, as you do, and try and explain this to him.
By the way, that's the way you talk
to Alistair Campbell. Yeah, on the email. Yeah. trying to explain to him, you know, because I think, you know, people like Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart and other centrists, they look at me and they think I'm like Nigel Farage. Yeah, they think you know, and they do this thing where they try to say, you know, the far left, like Zach Polanski and Gary, you know what I mean? Honestly, I think it's comedic to call me far left, you know what I mean? Because I'm like one of the best, I make millions of pounds betting on these things, which doesn't sound very far left. You know, these guys on the far right. And it's like, these are the only people, whether you like the way they're doing it, you need to have some passion. Yeah, and you need to understand where, you know, obviously you know you're a comedian, right? You know, it's about connection. Yeah. It's about, you know, and I think this anti-populism thing has basically given the centre like a chronic addiction to being boring. Yeah. And you know, in a world that is falling apart, you know, you need, and I think it's, you know, I think that the antipathy towards me from some of the political centre is insane. Yeah. It is. Listen, who the fuck else is going to save them? You know, I'm here. You know, I build this whole big platform so that I can sell political ideas to the public that are not extreme. You know, I am the person who's trying to stop the growth in inequality. I'm trying to stop the wealth redistribution. And you know, I think if they insist that anyone who's fucking exciting is the next fucking Adolf Hitler, then, you know, they're going to be in a lot of trouble.
There's proper research around, if you come from a certain background, which 40% of politicians do, is that you recognize emotion as actually being weakness or actually invalidating your argument, which is firstly really interesting in terms of like how did that end up? But it also makes sense of placing you almost in the same position as say Nigel Farage or anyone that's
because they see me as somebody who's communicating in what they see as an emotion driving way.
They see the signal rather than the message. Yeah. They see or the method rather than the message.
But what they don't understand is I'm good at this. You know, and if you're really good, you can deliver a message that is compelling and true and clear and also has emotion.
What's really interesting in your interview with Rory Stewart is you can see him not hearing what you're saying and responding to how you're saying it.
I think your class anger is not letting you see some of the realities of politics. Is it that you're choosing to present yourself in a certain way? Could you? I mean, given that you know how to change codes, right?
Yeah.
Presumably you could. There's a lot of things going on. I mean, you're making observations about psychology, lack of kindness and care in the home, structural inequalities of wealth, class, masculinity. Do you ever worry that some of these things are getting overlapped and overlaid in your mind so that anger, class, family backgrounds, school, masculinity are feeding in ways which are misleading you?
He can't hear
the economics.
Emotionally. He automatically just puts that in the class corner. Which also comes into all of that, because at the moment I see that the next stage of politics is a choice between two sides, which is what you're talking about. You've got the choice of angry, kind of just anger, just non-directed anger at immigrants or whoever's closest to be angry at, because the anger is real. It's 40 years of not being kind of seen or heard, and you've had every, you know, like, I mean, look at Labour, and Labour pretty much took on the frame of neoliberalism that the Thatcher government brought in. 40 years of people getting poorer and poorer and poorer while being told all the time, change. So of course they're angry. So you've got two options. You've got the angry, frustrated side of kind of like it's immigrants or it's other people. And basically Nigel Farage is walking into a gap of anger that isn't being recognised or talked to by Conservative and Labour. That's why there's this huge kind of growth of other parties, because they've been let down by both sides of parties. Yeah. And that is the cynicism gap that Nigel Farage walks into. And it's like, oh, actually, is anybody else harnessing this anger? Oh, they're not. I'll just saddle it up and ride it into 10 Downing Street. Yeah. Or you've got a hopeful anger that kind of says, listen, I'm part of this, you know, like having been let down, let's using the kind of anger and the frustration and the energy to actually get people together to work towards an actual, like, kind of, I suppose, positive or structural change. Yeah. Because the right isn't offering a structural change. It's offering more of the same, but ramped up to 50. The more progressive side is actually looking at a structure that's going to change, is offering a different economic view that the last 40 years has offered, right? I think why your channel is kind of so big, because like you're like the people that are watching, you know, whereas most people in politics aren't. They're very different, you know. 40% of politicians have been to private school. You know, it's a mad statistic. 7% of the population, 40% of politicians. What? Mad. So like with that in mind, your push for social media, like that's how we got. But like I'm really interested to talk about actually in detail of how we get people involved in that and your thoughts. You've talked about it a bit on the channel. I kind of want to go into a little bit of detail in a kind of supportive way for people. But like, just to open the chat around social media. But go on.
Yeah, so I did this video about a year ago now, where I was like really just basically doing a call out, like, guys, I want you to start making videos, because obviously I've made this thing, this Gary's Economics, and like it's been really successful and it's really big and it's really popular, it gets lots of views, and like I think it is like genuinely moving the political dial in the country.
It really is.
Yeah, but then you sort of you start. I'm super proud of the work that I've done, and I think I've done a lot of good work. I don't think it's gonna work if it's just me. I don't think it would be sustainable for me personally. But then it just becomes fucking cult of Gary, right? Like, and I don't think that's healthy for me. I don't think that's healthy, like, for the country. I think we need more voices in it. I think it helps me with my work, but I think it just makes a better product. It makes a better product. And it's a healthier space, like a much healthier space. Like if it's just me, that's not good for me. That's not good for my like ego, but it's not good for my like mental health. But I just think that I think there's such a gap there. Yeah. I think there's because I think it was obvious 5, maybe even 10 years ago that like political power is moving away from the traditional political parties and the traditional media, like the newspapers and, you know, the TV stations and the radio stations and towards online. Yeah. I think that was like really obvious a while ago. And I think it's actually super interesting, the failure of most of these traditionally powerful political groups to move. And the only group that really moved was the far right. And the far right, they're good at it in some senses, in like, you know, they make sure that new influencers are getting funded like early on.
You get a lot of early funding. Like I know a few interviewers, YouTubers that got absolutely funded.
Yeah.
By secret funding.
Right. Yeah. So, but I think, I think there's a political vacuum. I think there's everybody hates the Conservatives, you know, everybody hates Labour, you know, new Labour leader's going to try and come in and maybe try to revamp that. And I think we actually have to hope that works, because I think if it's not that, then it's going to be Farage. And I think Farage is not going to be good for living standards or for inequality.
But it's more of the same.
Yeah.
Just more of the same, whacked up to 11.
But everyone's online. This is where like the vast majority of ordinary people nowadays, you know, maybe some older people or some more middle class. Middle class people might be listening to the rest of politics, or older people might be watching the BBC, or maybe still buying newspapers, or, you know, who buys newspapers anymore? But what most ordinary people are doing, who are politicized, those people who are politicized, they're online. They're online, you know. And again, I was talking to Alistair Campbell, and you know what I said in my video, which was, you know, my recent video about the far right, was the reason people are supporting the far right is because they're the only group that is consistently transmitting a clear message on, we understand that living standards are falling and we have a story about why and how to fix it. Yeah. And what Alistair Campbell said back to me in the email was, I don't think they've got a clear message. And I found this super interesting, because from the perspective of somebody like Alistair Campbell, or maybe even somebody like me, that's completely true. If you actually want to like get like a written policy document that tells you very clearly what Reform and Farage are going to do, you'll struggle to get that. They haven't communicated in the way that political class sees at all a clear idea. But the people they are communicating to are watching videos online, often short videos on TikTok, on Instagram. They're sharing them with one another, which will be saying, you know, which will be very, very clearly connecting. The reason you can't get houses is because immigrants are coming, because Muslims are coming. The reason there's crime is because of immigrants, because of Muslims. Like, you know, constantly making these ideas. And Farage and Reform don't have to have an explicit policy platform because they just walk into this space which has been created essentially by TikTok and Instagram online. And a lot of people in this country and across the world are like instinctively, like, to be honest, a little bit horrified by things which are like, you know, often a lot of the stuff online is explicitly racist. A lot of it is explicitly racist. And you know, I see it. You know, and it's things, it's not just Muslims, you know, things I see online in, you know, like, you know, expensively made videos, things I see online said about black people on places like TikTok, you know, and a lot of the country sees that and they're like, what? And they don't want to, most of the country will never vote for Farage. But who else is providing that online product?
And the reason why that online product is so angry, is so kind of negative, is because that's what the algorithm gets fed by. So, you know, there's been whistleblowers like Tristan Harris who used to work for Facebook, who literally said, listen, there is a race to the bottom of the brainstem. If they can make you emotionally engaged, you stay longer on the platform. So it's the actual business profit model of eyes on platform to make people...
But these platforms are incredibly efficient because, you know, say TikTok, you know, a lot of these videos are made by AI now, right? Flooding it with AI videos. And they, you know, they can make an enormous amount of videos, and the testing is incredibly quick. So TikTok tends to be like first 2 seconds. So they'll see very, very quickly the kind of video that doesn't get scrolled off. So like, because they have all this big data,
they've got huge data.
They can create incredibly cheaply, especially with AI, the perfect video that they know you're going to watch. It's like designed to like hack your brain, basically.
Yeah, it is.
But I think, but at the end of the day, these videos, they are low quality. And I think there is space for, you know, somebody like me or somebody like yourself, or, you know, all these other great influencers that we know, like Louisa Munch and Jimmy the Giant and Anna Bocker, like to make actually real thought through videos by real humans. You know, obviously make videos, that's great. And, you know, we'll try and pick that up if we can. But you just, and, you know, support my work, support your work, you know, all these other great influencers out there and other people doing great things. But I think you have to just do something. Do something, even if it's once a month, and you will feel better for it, in my opinion. You know, people always ask what you can do. And I say, you know, you can join the Green Party, you can join Labour. It's not, you know, if you want to join Reform and campaign for wealth taxes there, do it. Somebody wrote a really sweet article on like young conservatives, the conservative case for a wealth tax. Like, I just want to say, like, just get involved. Somehow, even if it's just going and volunteering at a local food bank or like whatever. But everyone needs a hobby. Make this your fucking hobby. Just, and I'm not asking, nobody has to give everything. You know, you do one thing, you volunteer at something one day a week, you know, you join your political party and you go to the meeting once a month. What are we doing on wealth taxes? Why are we not doing more? Are we back in it? Yeah, you know, you volunteer at the food bank or the homeless shelter or whatever. Because once we know each other, then we stop being scared of each other and we realise we have a lot of the same fucking problems. You know, I grew up in a very Muslim area. You know, a lot of these people, they're struggling to pay the rent. They're struggling to pay the bills. They're struggling to buy a house. You know, they're no different to a poor white person in Grimsby or Rochdale. They're no different. They have the same fucking problems. You know what I mean? So I do think like if everyone is at home, you know, watching TikTok, obviously I'm on social media, but if everyone is at home watching TikTok in their bed, we're going to lose. But if people are out there trying to find ways to help one another, and I think if you give even one evening a month to just doing something that don't expect nothing back, it changes you as a human. It does. It stops you from being that someone who sees everything transactionally. It's community is going to be so important. Yeah. And when you look at the areas of the country that are most like passionately reform, they are the areas that have very, very, very often the areas that have very few non-white people. And I grew up surrounded by Muslims and Hindus and black people and Jews. You know, it's this very, very multicultural area. You know, if you ask me, that's going to cure your racism very quickly because you'll realise that there's fucking dickheads and fucking nice people of every fucking colour. Yeah. You'll see it very, very quickly, you know. But so, in a sense, the antidote to the far right is community. It is community because people have power.
So I hope you enjoyed that second part of the interview. As I say, these are edited highlights to really kind of focus on the documentary. I we did talk for 2.5 hours. And if you would like to feel a little bit more of the ramble and the where we talked about, the other things we talked about, you can see the full unedited interview on my Patreon. And I put it up on 2 halves. And I put it up in 2 halves because it's 2.5 hours long. So the second half is going up today. And you don't have to support my Patreon, you can just see it as a one-off. And also, if you want to support this channel, if you value what this channel is and what it's trying to do, then you can do that just simply with a one-off donation to buy me a coffee. Or if you want to see me perform live, stand up, you can sign up to my mailing list and let me know where you live so that I can come perform near you, or when I'm around, I can invite you. And also, I'm doing some Barry's Economics Live in London in August. So I've got 3 shows, one of them sold out, but we've got 2 more that I've just put on sale, and you can see the information in the, I'll probably put it in a pinned comment there after this video. Anyway, thank you for watching, and go and watch, if you haven't already, Gary Stevenson's documentary on Channel 4, How to Get Filthy Rich. Thanks for watching.